Hello, my name is Dr. Monique Henderson, and I am the coordinator for English learners at the Mississippi Department of Education. We are together today for the first in a three-part webinar series titled Serving Mississippi's English Learners, an Introduction. And again, this is part one. This is a response to requests from districts to have more information on how to effectively serve our English learners in the state, particularly as those numbers are growing. Just to review, the Mississippi Department of Education's vision is to create a world-class educational system that gives students the knowledge and skills to be successful in college and the workforce, and to flourish as parents and citizens. Our mission is to provide leadership through the development of policy and accountability systems so that all students are prepared to compete in the global community. And of course, an important part of that focus is that we want to serve all of our students, including our English learner population. You can be reminded that our State Board of Education goals for our 5-year strategic plan include that all students be proficient in showing growth in all assessed areas, that every student graduates high school and is ready for college and career, that every child has access to a high-quality early childhood program, that every school has effective teachers and leaders, and finally, that every community effectively uses a world-class data system to improve student outcomes. So today we will be talking about how to achieve some of those goals with our English learner population particularly in mind. Our agenda today. First, I'm going to share some data on the scope of the English learner population across Mississippi. I'm going to provide information on legal requirements for serving our English learners. I'm going to give examples of formats for providing English learner services. What will those different services look like? What are some possibilities? Also, I will be offering information on how you can create emotionally safe, comfortable environments for ELs, particularly in those early days that they're with you in your district. I also want to begin to build awareness about available resources and resources that will be coming in the future from the Mississippi Department of Education. And then I also want to seek input from you and hear from you on future professional development needs and resources, things that you would like to see to help you do a more effective job of serving our English learners. So you might wonder, how many ELs does Mississippi serve? It is a number that has been steadily changing. As of the end of January, we now have about 12,100 English learner students across Mississippi. Looking district by district, there's now only one Mississippi school district that doesn't have any identified EL students. There has been a 34% increase in the number of English learner students since May of 2015, with almost 4,000 students added. So we can see that this is a population that has grown. It has grown fairly steadily, but then we have seen a significant increase in the last several months. And looking at trends and projections, we do expect that the growth in this population will continue, both in pockets and statewide. So you might wonder, well, why do ELs come to Mississippi? What is it that's motivating this increase in the population? English learners, like most Mississippians, come here for some fairly common reasons. One is economic opportunity. They come here because of a job, an opportunity that they have in the workplace. Another reason they might come is family proximity. You see the beginnings of certain populations of speakers growing based on family. So maybe if one family moves in and then other family members over time come to join that first pioneer family that came into the area. Another reason that Mississippi is attractive to English learners is the low cost of living. Compared to some of our surrounding states, your money can go further in Mississippi. And then finally, to escape a crisis in their home country. That might be related to a war, it might be related to environmental issues, it might be related to economic crisis. So knowing that this population is growing, then we have to consider, what are our responsibilities? What should we be doing to ensure that we are doing a good job of serving this group of students? One of the first memos to come out addressing the needs and responsibilities of our English learners was a 1970 memo from the Office for Civil Rights. And in that memo it said, where the inability to speak and understand the English language excludes national origin minority group children from effective participation in the educational programs offered by a school district, the district must take affirmative steps to rectify the language deficiency in order to open up its instructional program to these students. So from reading this, we can see that access is key. Students cannot be hindered in their access to an education because of their limited English proficiency. We have to figure out ways to effectively serve those students. So under federal law, we know that students cannot be excluded from participation in school because of language challenges. They have to be able to participate in the same extracurricular and academic activities, and they have to have access to the same academic content, curriculum content. They cannot be inappropriately assigned to special education classes. An inability to speak English in and of itself is not a special education classification. They also cannot be placed in dead-end track programs that are not designed to help them learn both English and academic content. So we have to be addressing both the need to build their English proficiency and their need and their right to have access to the academic content that their peers are receiving. So what is required? Again, the 1974 Educational Opportunity Act mandated no state shall deny adequate education by, quote, failure to take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by students in an education program. It's our job to make sure that our students are able to overcome those language barriers. An important step in serving English learners is obviously identifying them, pinpointing who is it that is an English learner, and then how should they be most effectively served. In Mississippi, all students should receive a home language survey when they enter a school district. Some of the questions that typically are on a home language survey may include what is the first language of the student, what language is most often spoken by the student, and then what language is most often spoken by adults in the home. We also want to look at other languages that the student can read if they're literate in a different language. The next step after we have identified a student as a potential English learner is to assess the student. Students who have been identified as speaking a language other than English at home or with their family in the community should be tested using our new Loss Links assessment. So that assessment will identify the level that the English learner is functioning at. Loss Links scores should be shared with general education and EL teachers. There's valuable data within those scores about what level the English learner is in different areas. So we want to make sure that we are passing that on again, not just to the English learner teachers, not just to administrators, but to that general education teacher who has that student in a particular academic area. So what happens once a student is identified English learner? Students should be given at least 30 minutes a day of direct instruction in the English language if they are not proficient in English. Students must have access to direct language instruction and access to academic content in subject areas. So we can't pull a child from the regular school day and say, your only job right now is to learn English. We have to also make sure that while they're learning English, they are building that knowledge in math, science, social studies, literature, etc. There are different models for different programs that can be used to serve English learners. We do not recommend one program over another. We recognize that each of our schools and each of our districts have very different, very unique English learner populations. Looking nationally and internationally, however, here are some types of programs that you might see being used to serve English learners. First, there's bilingual education. That's where students receive instruction in their native language for all or some content areas. And then you're slowly building in more English. So academic instruction, things like math, science, those are taught in the native language. Then at the same time, they're also receiving instruction in English that will help them to eventually function in a regular classroom. The challenge, obviously, with bilingual education is that you need homogeneous language groups. If you're a campus where all of your ELs are Spanish-speaking or Japanese-speaking or another language, this might be an effective model for you, and if you have the teachers to staff it. If, however, you have a very diverse group of languages represented on your campus, this probably would not be an effective tool for you. Another possibility is dual language immersion. This is where native English speakers and ELs are placed in class together, and the goal is that each group is learning the other's native language. So you might have a student who is strictly English speaking learning, say, Spanish, while at the same time a native Spanish speaker is interacting and learning English. So the idea is that both groups are building language skills in a new language. Again, this works more when you have a more homogeneous grouping than if you have a number of different EL backgrounds represented on your campus. Finally, there's probably the most common model seen in Mississippi is the sheltered or structured English immersion model. Under that model, students of different levels of English proficiency are grouped together. Intensive language instruction is received. It's often done through a pull-out program. Could be done through a push-in program into a classroom. And then academic concepts are taught in a regular classroom in English with extra language supports. In some cases, students may have access to an aide who speaks their native language. The key here is to use English learner best practices, things like lots of visuals, lots of supports to help build that academic understanding and to build that vocabulary. So we have some expectations that have been set for Mississippi schools serving EL students. As mentioned earlier, Mississippi now uses the language proficiency assessment, it is required by the federal government that we use a language assessment. We use the new CTB McGraw-Hill Lost Links assessment, and it is administered to EL students. It needs to be within 30 days of them entering school. And then there's a testing window that opens for reassessment each year in March. The Lost Links assessment measures areas including reading, writing, speaking, listening, and comprehension skills. So there's 5 different domains of English learner development. It also helps accurately assess academic and social language skills. So it's not just looking at, does the student have the language to function on the playground, but does the child have the language they need to be successful in an academic classroom? And the Lost Links identifies students under 5 different proficiency levels. It's also broken down by grade bands. There's a K1 band that has one set of expectations. There's a 2nd and 3rd grade band, a 4th and 5th grade band, 6th through 8th, and then a high school band 9th through 12th. Looking at the Lost Links, they identify 5 different proficiency levels, and those levels begin with the beginning proficiency level. That's a student who is maybe just barely beginning to develop any language at all, to a student who's early intermediate, and then intermediate, and then from there students would move to proficient, and then when they're ready to exit the program and fully function without any support, they would be considered above proficient. So we have these English learners, again 12,100 of them as of the end of this month, who we are responsible for teaching and equipping in our classrooms. So what's the goal of our EL instruction? The goal is that students should be receiving instruction to help them progress through the language proficiency levels, with the goal of ultimately being above proficient and being able to exit EL services. Students should be supported in both English acquisition and academic content. Academic learning should not and cannot stop because the student is learning a new language. So again, it's not enough to just provide that child with English instruction intensified for 30 minutes a day. You also have to make sure that your general education teachers are using strategies to build their academic understanding and to help them continue moving forward in academic content areas. Again, general education teachers are expected to use extensive English learner strategies to help students build that content knowledge. We wanted to be sure that this webinar did a good job of supporting schools and districts who are dealing with English learners for the first time, or for teachers who are for the first time ever saying, I have an English learner student in my classroom. I'm not really sure what to do next. So you're saying, you have your first student. Now, what do you do? I want you to begin by considering this. I want you to close your eyes and pretend that you suddenly find yourself in a restaurant in a foreign land you've been somehow transported to. You don't speak the language. You have absolutely no foundation in this language. You're not even really sure what this language is. You're very hungry and you need to order a meal. Now think, what would help you to effectively order that meal? What could make you successful in doing that? How would you like for other people to treat you as you were trying to order this meal? And then what might make you more comfortable in your efforts to speak this new language, to make sense of it, and to effectively get what you need, which is food? I'd like at this time for you to pause this webinar, give yourself about 90 seconds to 2 minutes to think about and list your ideas. So again, we're looking at what would help you if you were trying to speak a brand new language and order a meal in a new country. What would help you, and how would you like people to treat you, and what would help you to be comfortable? And then come back and join me after 2 minutes. So, looking at your list, what would have been helpful? Maybe on your list you have friendly and supportive people. I know that definitely helps me to be more effective when I'm doing something new where I'm maybe out of my comfort zone. Maybe what you really need is visual clues. If you could just look through the menu and look at some pictures, that would help you to make sense. Maybe you would like to have had help from a buddy, help from a friend who maybe spoke your language and also this mysterious new language. Maybe what you were really looking for and hoping to find is familiar cognates that will carry over from English to this language that is so foreign to you. So consider this. Odds are good that your new ELL students are probably hoping to see some of the same supports and behaviors that you would find helpful if operating in a language new to you. It's basically a universal experience in a lot of ways, learning a new language. So keep this in mind kind of as your foundation, as you're planning your instruction and thinking about and building your classroom management for English learners. We have some tips for the first day. First, you want to help the student to relax and begin to know what to expect. Now, this seems like a really basic thing, but you want to smile. You want to seem friendly. You want to seem happy that this new student is with you. You want to greet the student, in a friendly and warm way. If possible, maybe consider learning a greeting in the student's home language. I have to say, my mother is actually French, and she's been living in the United States for years and years. When she is in a crisis, she has historically dealt with the same doctor, and this is a doctor who speaks French very fluently. That is a huge comfort to her. Just hearing even just a little bit of her language, her home language, is very comforting. And I think it's the same way for our students. They are comforted by hearing even just an attempt, in some cases a very bad attempt, at a little bit of their language. It feels a little bit like home to them. Another thing is to assign a peer guide, another peer who can just help the student through the day. It's wonderful if you have another student who speaks the same language, but even an English-speaking peer guide can be quite helpful. You want to try to provide a schedule for the day, and if possible, to add pictures to that. so the student knows what to expect in each class or in each activity throughout the day. You want to make sure the student knows the basics, the important stuff that you'd want to know in another country, like how do I eat? What are the lunch procedures? How do I go to the restroom? What are the restroom procedures? Over the first days, you want to get to know your student as much as possible. Of course, this is something you're already doing with your regular ed students, but it might be particularly important for an English learner student who is in such an unfamiliar and new environment. Some ways to overcome language barriers might include drawing pictures, using hand motions and gestures, and then using some of the cognates to communicate. Things to remember in those first day greetings. We talked about smiling. We know that body language is more important when we can't use our words to communicate. So you want to smile. You want to try to avoid crossing your arms, even if it's cold. That's a downfall sometimes. You want to avoid sighing or squinting, etc. These might be misunderstood, and viewed as anger or as frustration. You want to speak slowly and clearly. Think about yourself again. If you were operating in a different language that you didn't know, speaking slowly might help you to pick out some words. And then don't raise your voice in an effort to be understood. This is a behavior that you often see. It kind of sneaks up on you where you feel like you can't be understood. You want to do something to fix the problem. And so the next thing you know, you've raised your voice. But of course, the student might interpret that as anger or as resentment. So we want to do what we can to avoid that. Here are just some ideas on getting to know you questions, things that you can do to get to know your students. We have to keep the questions very simple in a lot of cases if we have a student who is at a very basic level of English language proficiency. You can ask something like, what do you like to do for fun? Or what is fun to you? You might ask, what do you like learning? What is something you are good at? Or what is your favorite book? Who is in your family can be an important one, especially as you're trying to make sense of the student's life outside of school and what's important to them and who they have in their life to support them. And then you might ask, what did you do at your last school? What makes you smile? And a universal favorite, what do you like to eat? So looking at creating a safe and comfortable environment. Ideally, if you have time, you want to try to prepare peers for the arrival of a new student, particularly if you're in an area where English learners are fairly new to your other students. You want to just kind of take some time to talk about what are the challenges of learning a new language? What is it like to try to adapt to new cultures? And then how can peers help? You want to try to take some of that stigma of being a non-English speaking student away from the student who's coming in. You also want to learn how to say the student's name correctly and to try to teach classmates also. Names are important. It's tempting sometimes when a name is very unfamiliar to want to shorten it or give the student a nickname. But really, names are an important part of our identity, and so we want to find out what it is the student wants to be called. We want to make sure that we're doing what is best and most comfortable for the student, not merely what is best for us as adults. We also want to consider teaching peers a welcoming phrase in the English learner student's native language if possible. So again, just those little connections of language that might feel like home to the new student. You want to follow regular routines. Again, we already mentioned, if possible, providing a visual agenda, but not deviating from those regular routines any more than is absolutely necessary. If time allows, and it's part of the curriculum, you might want to invite the student to share elements of their culture, specific words, customs, etc. Again, as is appropriate within the context of your classroom and your curriculum. You want to model your expectations through role-playing or other physical modeling. So a student might not understand what you expect, but if you can model that and show that, it will be effective. You also, again, might want to assign a peer to serve as a buddy to answer questions, but also to act as something of a cultural guide, kind of helping them to make sense of the school culture and what they encounter throughout the day. So this concludes the end of part 1 of our introductory EL webinar. Obviously, this was not intended to answer all of your questions. It was to give you a starting place, a starting point of how do we serve these 12,100 students effectively across our state? What is our obligation? How can we make sure that they're most comfortable on their first days? Now, our work with you will not stop here, of course. First, we want to hear from you. We want to know what professional development would help you most, and we're talking in the form of webinars like this, yes, but also some live professional development, and also what resources would be helpful. So I would love to hear from you. My email address at the Mississippi Department of Education it's kind of catchy, mohenderson@mdek12.org. Again, that's mohenderson@mdek12.org. Now, looking ahead, what is planned? What are we going to continue to do to make sure that you're getting what you need? We are planning a full-day professional development that will be for administrators and general education teachers serving ELs. We don't necessarily see this as being a place where you would want to send your EL teachers who have already become very, very familiar with EL best practices. Our first priority is really supporting our general education teachers who are dealing with English learners the first time. Also administrators that are trying to understand what is it that I want to look for when I enter that classroom. How do I even assess the instruction of English learners? What's appropriate? What's required under federal law? Also, training will be available in using our new EL resource guides that we're going to be putting out soon for teachers and administrators. Another thing I want you to know is that we, especially me, I'm available to do coaching at individual schools. And then again, our first priority will be with administrators and general ed teachers new to EL instruction. So we want to be out in your schools and in your districts helping you to do the best that you possibly can with this new opportunity that we have together. And then remember that additional webinars will be posted here. Some proposed webinar topics that I've already heard. A big one is just best practices for EL students. What are some research-supported practices that we can implement that will do the most possible for our EL students? We're also looking at giving an overview of language acquisition and the stages of language development. Also, building family and school communication. I'll be talking about that some in the second webinar that you see here, the second part of our introductory webinar. Building family and school communication. And then another priority for a webinar topic is going to be strengthening academic language of ELs. Coming soon, we will have English learner resource guides for teachers and administrators. We'll have regional trainings on information included in the guides available soon. I'm including some helpful links for EL educators at the end of this. Scrolling through. Some important MDE contacts. Again, I'm Monique Henderson, and I am the ELL PD coordinator. And another person for you to reach out to that's happy to help is Taro Funches. She's our Title III coordinator, and she's in federal programs. Thank you again for your time today. I hope that you will continue to watch for webinars that we'll be posting and to look for different resources that will be coming from the Mississippi Department of Education to help you serve your EL students. Thank you.